Hello, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly webinar series. My name is Sam Westrop. I am the director of its Islamist Watch program. I'm delighted to be joined today by Hannah Baldock, a journalist and counter-extremism researcher, most recently with the London-based Henry Jackson Society. She holds a BA in Modern Languages from Cambridge University and a postgraduate diploma in journalism from City University, London. And Hannah has written very interestingly in recent weeks and months on the promising development of new reformist strains within British Islam, as well as the threat, the problem posed by extant Islamist forces, which have been around for decades and continue to enjoy legitimacy and recognition from the media and from policymakers. We're here to discuss that question, to discuss why the British media in particular continues to empower Islamists and legitimize them as representatives of British Islam, and to ask what the solution might be. Hannah, hi, thank you so much for joining us. If I could start off, can you very briefly, for a primarily American audience, explain who are the people, what are the groups that British media turn to when they want comment from British Muslims? Oh, Hannah, you're on mute, I believe.
Apologies, yeah. Since around about 1989, when at the time of the Salman Rushdie affair, Islamist factions who had that work of literature and had made their voices heard very loudly in the public square at that moment for the first time, mobilized and formed the core of what became the Muslim Council of Britain. We heard in 2014 in a review by the coalition government led by David Cameron of the Muslim Brotherhood's UK activities that organisation, obviously a revolutionary Islamist outfit, had been instrumental in setting up the Muslim Council of Britain, as well as the largest Muslim student organisation, which is recognised to be FOSIS. And the Muslim Association of Britain also became another front for the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK. But it's the Muslim Council of Britain who have prevailed really as the go-to outfit, the first port of call for the British media and journalists when issues concerning Islam and Muslims arise. And they have been the best organised. They are an umbrella organisation for, well, they claim to have 500 affiliates. And a report in 2016 by the Policy Exchange, Choosing Our Friends Wisely, described them as an umbrella organisation for Islamist groups. But that description hasn't really stuck to them. They have generally, they have set themselves up as a voice for British Muslims and have crowded out other voices who would beg to differ from their which is really rooted in sort of extreme orthodox patriarchal politics of South Asia primarily. That's who their affiliates are seen to.
I see, and I should just take this moment to remind our audience that there'll be a moment for questions at the end. So if you do have any during this session, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and enter your question, and I'll get to it. Hannah, why did the MCB become this leading voice, though? What led journalists to turn to the MCB, the Muslim Council of Britain, instead of other groups, maybe less radical ones?
Well, I think initially they were well funded. One of their founding trustees, and who confided in me that he had parted ways with the Muslim Council of Britain because he'd found them to be sectarian and extreme. He did say they had had a lot of help from rich sponsors in the Gulf to set up, and they began to produce very polished press releases and statements in a very timely fashion. And I think initially hoped that they could act as a bulwark against extremists. They've always condemned Islamist violence in the UK, although they haven't done so they haven't condemned similar violence that you might see in Israel, for example. But they seem to be, they were seen to be people that the government could work with, and people that had a large constituency of supporters, and that they could help the government sort of deconstruct what the problems seemed to be, the problems that were inciting the violence that we've seen over the last several decades from Islamist extremist groups.
I see. And I believe in your piece recently for Focus on Western Islamism, you mentioned that the government at times has acknowledged the Islamist roots of the Muslim Council of Britain, and indeed that it continues to present a problem when it comes to matters of extremism. So if this is the case, why does the media still turn to the Muslim Council of Britain with the knowledge that they are empowering an Islamist group? Is there a willful disregard of the threat that Islamism poses?
I mean, it's baffling, really. I mean, there's particularly since Sajid Javid, for example, who's the Muslim who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time. He was standing to be leader of the Conservative Party back in 2019. He said, "I would be very suspicious of what the Muslim Council of Britain has to say. You know, we don't deal with them, and we haven't since 2009 because of links that they've had to extremists. You find me a group of Muslims who is represented by the MC," he said. Nevertheless, I think I think the person who summed it up best for me was Pragna Patel, who runs an outfit called Southall Black Sisters, which defends minority women's rights. She said that it's possible to fight racism and fundamentalism at the same time. I don't seem to get it. She says the Muslim Council of Britain have very successfully portrayed themselves as the Muslim community as a community which is the underdog. It's constantly in danger of experiencing a racist backlash and being tarred with the same brush as extremists. So portrayed the prevent counter-extremism strategy as an assault on civil liberties of Muslims and an assault on their free speech. So it's actually deflected and denied really that Islamist ideology even exists or is a problem, and it has consistently conflated Islam and Islamism, and to the point where I think editors and producers who really should have done research on this very pressing matter, which is rocking the Western world, they haven't been confident of their own convictions in distinguishing Islam from Islamism, and they have been. There's been a lot. I think they talk of post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan invasion guilt, the doubt that possibly extremism is a blowback from these foreign policy. Some would call them mistakes or ill-fated excursions into the Middle East, and I think they have let themselves be let the seeds of doubt be planted in their minds that whether Islamist ideology is to blame for these attacks and the motivations behind them.
Interesting. And is this a portion of the media, perhaps more on one side of the spectrum, or is this a problem across the board?
Well, it has become a problem across the board because, I mean, the BBC, for example, which is obviously the UK's flagship media outlet, it's the most watched internationally, and it has on several occasions in recent years invited talking heads onto the sofas of Morning Britain this morning. That's on ITV. But I mean, for example, Boris Johnson got into some hot water when he wrote an opinion piece about the burqa ban in Denmark. He said he wasn't in favour of one in the UK, but he didn't think that, essentially his argument was he didn't think it was really very appropriate or necessary to wear a niqab on the streets of Britain. And the BBC invited Sahar Al-Faifi to debate this point, who was billed simply as a woman who's covered her face since she was 14 on one hand, and she was billed as Muslim Council of Britain on the other. Al Jazeera Arabic described her quite differently. He said that she was a known Islamist, well, a member of the Saudi opposition, follower of the preacher Safa al-Hawali, who's the author of a book, Muslim and Western Civilization, in which he refers to the West as the enemy, supports terrorist acts regardless of the effects on the communities, believes Muslims have a religious duty to support jihadists. Guido Fawkes looked on her Twitter feed, saw pictures of Hamas leaders in an open-top cavalcade, which she was wishing them a mighty victory, and the Muslim Brotherhood salute. They were making the Muslim Brotherhood salute. So a producer the British public was she went on to run for the Welsh Senate on the back of the huge publicity she garnered from her appearances on Good Morning Britain, until she finally, more anti-Semitic tweets were unveiled, and she was suspended from Plath Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party. But all of this and this has happened time and time again, where the British public has been invited to listen to representatives of the Muslim Council of Britain or its political lobbying offshoot MEND, and without any knowledge of who they're listening to, or what their worldview might be. And essentially, it's always been to portray any doubts about Islamic practices or doctrines as based on ignorance, Islamophobia, and prejudice. So there's been a very it's become a very murky picture for the general public trying to understand really what's going on.
Fascinating. And is there a role played here by foreign Islamist powers, foreign Islamist states? We've all seen how, for instance, the Qatari regime uses media in the West to great effect. And I'm thinking of things like Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye and so on. Does this have an effect on the way British journalism covers Islam and Islamism in the West?
Well, I think journalists often find that that there were several journalists who were very diligently covering Islamist groups and their activities, one of whom was Andrew Gilligan. He then went on to become a transport minister in a Conservative government. But there have been others who have made documentaries, and Andrew Norfolk has done quite a bit for the Sunday Times. And I know various of them have experienced, they've been sued, and they have been, the criticisms they've made have been hotly contested. I think some of the Islamist-led groups in the UK have been using very expensive lawyers like Carter Ruck, who charge £1,000 an hour, to bring libel suits. Well, I mean, it's now seen as really using lawfare to sort of silence criticism. There's been speculation as to who might have the deep pockets to help them pay for these very sort of defensive libel actions, sometimes preemptive libel actions. And I mean, I think that there has been, I think you yourselves at Focus on Western Islamism have uncovered a lot as regards support from Qatar, for example, for some Islamist groups in the UK. And I think they have also, some Islamist groups have contributed to IPSO guidance, the guidance of the UK press regulator on reporting on Islam and Muslims. They've contributed to a definition of Islamophobia, which was widely adopted in 2019, despite the opposition of counter-terrorist experts, women's groups, minority rights groups, who said it failed to distinguish between criticism of Islam and anti-Muslim hatred. And so there's been a lot of smoke and mirrors, and I think the best indicator of how Gulf states may be supporting these groups is just how deep their pockets are, how many people they employ, how slick their media campaigns are, which continue to be quite relentless, and the counter-extremism, the counter-prevent campaigns, the Islamophobia Awareness Month every year, which obviously they have every right to raise issues over genuine discrimination, prejudice, intolerance, but it's the refusal to ever look inwards and discuss the possibilities of reform that might be needed within the Muslim community, and that's where these new groups which are coming onto the scene, like the Oxford Institute for British Islam, could be very valuable to the national debate.
Okay, and then just lastly, before I head to some audience questions, could you tell us about this new group then, the OIBI, and what its mission is, and why you hope it will replace groups like the MCB as the go-to voice for British media and policymakers?
Yeah, so I think basically that the groups like the MCB and their political lobbying offshoot, MEND, and the groups that really garnered the media attention have and tried to dominate the discourse are predominantly sort of Sunni Islamist groups, and part of the criticism of the Islamophobia definition was that it didn't address any intersectarian hostility, which has been seen very recently, for example, in the attack on the free speech of a Shia Muslim film producer and writer who saw their film banned from cinemas due to some mob demonstrations. The OIBI has set itself out to be pluralist. It was founded by Dr. Taj Hagi. He's a South African-born Muslim. He doesn't describe himself as any one sect or another. His mosques, he's got a mosque in Cape Town called the Open Mosque, and another in Oxford, which welcomes people from all denominations, all faiths, and none. And he's tried to create, he says they're passionately pluralistic. They want to just create an open forum, a debate. What they're very determined about is to counter divisive and interpretations of Islam. They reject, well, they are sort of a Quran-centric, as they call it, outfit, where they're happy to debate verses of the Quran which have been deemed to be controversial, but they reject the Hadith, the Sharia, and the fatwas, which they say are man-made. Basically, they reject. They think that they're man-made parts of Islamic doctrine which are created by male clergy and designed to perpetuate their power over women, and their predominant position within Islamic countries. And so they want to just create a modern, progressive, forward-looking, open and pluralistic British Islam, as they call it, which is aligned with what a lot, is what the Muslim Reform Movement is, a global coalition of Muslim reformers. In fact, one of their founders, Osama Hassan, is also a visiting fellow with the OIBI. And they want to also just, I think, create a port of call for British Muslims who are caught between, who are experiencing cognitive dissonance between their British identity and, which is pro secular democracy and obviously pro individual freedoms and their Muslim identity, which they've been told in many mosques, is at odds with those values. And I think it's caused a lot of heartache and identity crises for many young Western Muslims, and the OIBI aims to theologically empower, as it says, young Western Muslims to reinterpret their faith in a way that's just more conducive with living in the Western world and in an open and free society, and obviously a pluralistic society.
I see. Now, we've had a couple of questions about a new government in Britain, and with the death of the Queen, I imagine Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, will have her attention, like the rest of the country, firmly focused elsewhere for the next few weeks, if not months. However, Bill Baggett asks, what changes will there be under Truss when it relates to Islamism? And in fact, another questioner, Richard Cronenfeld, particularly asked, does Truss have any influence on the BBC? Can we at least have the BBC take a more reasonable line when it comes to the question of Islamism? So I suppose two questions really. One, what are your hopes for the Truss government on the question of Islamism more broadly? And two, what about the BBC? Is it time that as a taxpayer-funded service that the government imposed some sort of stricter rules on how the BBC covers Islam or Islamism?
Liz Truss, I'm not sure what her views on Islamism are. I know she was preoccupied with Ukraine, I think, as Foreign Secretary. I haven't heard her speak specifically about Islamism, but I would hope she would do more than Boris Johnson's government has done on it. It's interestingly, I mean, Michael Gove, who was the member of Boris Johnson's government, had written a book on Islamism. Well, Celsius 7/7, he'd written after the 7/7 attack. So it was surprising that he wasn't very proactive on this issue, and I think obviously was because it is such a thorny issue. There's a political and cultural trap in truthfully identifying the problems, especially as the voting constituencies get larger, Muslim community. But we'll have to just watch the space with Liz Truss. I mean, she's obviously going to have a lot of domestic, very pressing domestic issues with a cost of living crisis, and unless there's energy policy and support for Ukraine, I think unless there's any fresh terror attacks or atrocities, that'll be when we find out. But with the BBC, they have appointed a new Director General, Tim Davey, who was I think appointed under the Boris Johnson government. The BBC had kind of a lot of heat for seeing alleged left-wing bias. Some of the reporters they'd had who were particularly guilty of those types of lapses of editorial impartiality, like Emily Maitlis of Newsnight, have gone. But again, they do need to. I mean, they had Roshan Saleh of Five Pillars on Newsnight, BBC's Newsnight recently, who debating, the Our Lady of Heaven, this film that the Sunni Islamists had wanted banned. And she introduced his website as just a website popular with Sunni Muslims. Whereas, if you look on Sarah Khan, who was the Commissioner for Countering Extremism, has repeatedly identified Five Pillars as supportive of key tenets of Islamist ideology, including physical jihad, a caliphate, and death penalties for apostates and so forth. And they shouldn't be. They need to start identifying Islamists as such, and not just and also identifying Islamist ideology as an ideology hostile to secularism, democracy, Western social freedoms. These are not. It's just they do need to get a grip on this kind of cultural relativism where everybody's worldview is is equally valid in terms of where this country is heading or wants to be heading. But I think there's a learning curve for not just the BBC, but all of the media about Islamism as an ideology. It needs to become as well understood as, communism, capitalism, all of the other, as a sort of ideology cooked up in the 20th century. It's not a sacred, spiritual project that we can't discuss. It's a 20th century political ideology, which needs to be just deconstructed and debated as rigorously as possible, along with any other belief system. And they need to just sort of basically realize that the Muslim Council of Britain, with its line of narratives of grievance and victimhood and Islamophobia, they need to just take it with a pinch of salt and carry on to debate the issues, because really, when we're having MPs sort of butchered in their constituency surgeries, as Sir David Amess was last year, we need to stop pussyfooting around the issues, as Dr. Taj Hagi of the OIBI would say, because it's reached a point where Elham Mania of the OI, she's a visiting fellow of the OIBI who wrote The Perils of Nonviolent Islamism. She talks about the huge pink elephant in the room of the ideology, which everybody knows is there but isn't discussing. And I think, well, hopefully, gradually, as the Muslim reformers, and including the Muslim reform movement, who've done some great work in America, and I think are listened to by many interested parties over here, if we can help them gain some more traction and counter the Islamist narratives, more and more editors and producers will hopefully cotton on.
So I think we've got time for one more question, although I'll combine several. Quite a few have asked about, well, this is very interesting about the situation in the UK. Is this the same in mainland Europe? One questioner asks particularly about the group CAIR, which is now focusing heavily on France and being active there. So your expertise is obviously the UK, but do you consider the UK to be, and the media's relationship with Islamism in the UK, do you consider that to be, the UK to be particularly worse off, or is this a problem across the Western world at the moment?
No, well, it seems to me that Emmanuel Macron has grasped the nettle somewhat in France. And last year, I think after the stabbing of the Samuel Paty, the school teacher, in the street, after he taught a lesson on blasphemy, which, by the way, happened, something similar happened in Batley in Yorkshire, and a teacher is still in hiding who tried to teach a similar lesson on free speech using cartoons of the Prophet, I think. I think that it seems that France has been quite proactive. It's tried to get imams to sign a declaration of adherence to the values of the Republic, free speech, tolerance for minorities, and women's equality and so forth. I think it's actually basing a scheme to license imams only if they will declare an oath of allegiance to the values of the Republic. It's closed down quite a lot of mosques which were found to have hosted Islamist speakers. And I think it is now developing a raft of laws to try and tackle the problem. I think Germany is doing quite a bit, and Belgium. I think really the UK has been sitting on its hands rather, with in terms of taking any concrete measures. There have been several mosques where there have been several documentaries. Undercover Mosque was made in 2008 or 2009 by very brave Muslim undercover reporters who went and filmed some of the sort of hate preaching that was going on in mosques. But one of the preachers in that film is still preaching at that mosque. The result of that was that Channel 4 were sued by West Midlands police for sort of inciting racial hatred in a court case which they lost. So it's been surprising how little. I mean, the government was considering banning groups like Hibs ut-Tahrir, but it hasn't done. I think they are banned in some European countries. I think their argument was that it's better to defeat extremist groups like this by debating them. But then, as Sarah Khan, the Counter-Extremism Commissioner, pointed out, unfortunately, nobody has. They've had a pretty long free run with their narrative, and very few people have countered it. Those who have, like herself, have been smeared as Islamophobes or part of the neo-Khan or Zionist conspiracy to do down Muslims. And so it's wonderful that the OIBI and other organisations, British Muslims for Secular Democracy was another one, who tried to stand up and counter the Islamist ideology, which is not supported by the majority of British Muslims, and as successive studies have shown. Just they have had loud voices, they've had lots of funding, but they haven't got majority support from the British community, and that's what needs to be consistently repeated and aired.
Understood. Well, Hannah, I feel we've come to the end of our time here. So thank you so much for coming on and explaining just a whole new world of Islamism to our audience. For those who want to read Hannah's recent piece, it's at Focus on Western Islamism, which is at islamism.news. Hannah, thank you very much for your time. I hope we'll be able to work together in the future. And for everyone else, MEF runs a regular webinar series, so if you haven't already signed up on our mailing list to be alerted to future webinars, please do so at meforum.org. Thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.